What happens in other countries around the world in terms of their policy of curfew, lockdown?
So most countries, as you can see, that many countries choose to do similar things. For example, closing restaurants and bars and allowing them for only takeaway services and closing schools and universities as well. But let's clarify a bit between curfew and lockdown for those who are still using these words interchangeably. For curfew, it's similar to what the Thai Prime Minister General Prayut Chan-o-cha announced yesterday night, that the curfew is more like a government enforcement that requires residents to stay at home during certain times. So what the Prime Minister said yesterday was 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. in the morning. But if it's a lockdown, it's more than a curfew. So no one is allowed to leave or to enter freely, whether it's in a building or in an area. But if all places are closed, some places, depending on which country you're living in, there will be security forces, security checkpoints around the place. So they will be there in case, like, to check whether the citizens actually comply with the measures announced by the government.
Yeah. So in Thailand, it's mixing between curfew and lockdown, partial lockdown, or whole lockdown in some provinces. But what happened in the US? Have they announced curfew or lockdown yet?
To give you a bit of an update, President Trump hasn't really mentioned about the lockdown. But what he has mentioned previously is that the next 2 weeks ahead, it will be a painful week for all Americans. But besides not mentioning the lockdown yet, but what he has mentioned is that he requested all citizens to comply with social distancing guidelines. But besides that, many of the states have decided to proceed with lockdowns and some with state of emergencies. For example, like in New York City, where there are many of new infections and pretty much the highest in compared to other states and around the world. Also in New Jersey also has a lockdown as well.
Yes, so that New York is epicenter of the coronavirus in the US, so they have imposed quite strict measure to fight against it. But I noticed that President Trump resists to use the word stay at home order or state order of staying at home. He still make a request like cooperation.
Yes, because like stay at home is like the best thing that all Americans could do at this moment. So I'm guessing that despite that he has not really mentioned the word lockdown, but many states around the country has proceeded with lockdowns or even state of emergencies without the order from President Trump.
Yeah, state of emergency has been announced about 2 weeks ago in the US. And what about in Europe? We can see how the situation is quite bad, especially in Italy, in Spain. They have already announced lockdown.
Yes, there has been a lockdown in Italy. So if you remember back in the beginning of March, when you think of Venice or Milan, when you think of these places, the first thing you will think of is like not just the beautiful sceneries, but you will also think of the amount of tourists in that place. So when the lockdown was placed at the beginning of March, the whole scene is completely different. No tourists, or even Venice, where you would normally see gondola boats, they're so empty, and everyone has decided to stay at home and not just travel.
Yes, it must be quite challenging for Spaniard and Italian because it's their nature of fun-loving, enjoy going out. But right now they have to quarantine, stay at home mostly.
Yeah. What would you like to say, Kun Thepachai?
Now, going back to the US, I think it's very interesting that within few hours from now, some kind of recommendation is expected from the White House on the need to wear face masks. And certainly this departure from President Trump's early stand about this issue Because a few weeks ago he said that Americans did not wear face masks because it wasn't necessary to help prevent the coronavirus. But after the country has become a new epicenter of the virus now, so every possible measures that they can think of are now being introduced. So the White House will be soon issuing recommendations that Americans wear masks when they go out on the streets to reduce the chance of them getting infected. But of course, this will not be mandatory, as President Trump said today that he believed that Americans, not everyone would want to wear face masks, so it's up to them to decide whether or not they want to wear one. But of course, the recommendation is that they should.
Still using the word recommendation, still not compulsory. No. But it's the shift of the tone of using the mask in the US, because previously even physicians told American citizens that they don't need to wear face mask. But right now, obviously, the tone has changed.
Yeah, because during the beginning, like if we remember what President Trump has said, he's so positive and so optimistic about how will the U.S. deal with the coronavirus. But recently, the way he talked to the press, everything has changed, and it seems like he starts to admit that it's a real pandemic.
Yes, and closer to Thailand, Khun Nat, what about Philippines? The measure seems very, very tough.
Very harsh as well.
Between life and death.
Very harsh as well, because he decided to tell the citizens, if you do not comply with the rules, you'll get shot.
Yeah, that's from President Duterte. So, but that's real tough.
That's real tough because Philippines has a very huge population. So that is pretty much the best way to control their people during this pandemic. But another country who decided to take the harsh way, besides Philippines, India also took a very harsh way from bashing their citizens if they go out in public.
Yes, they have announced national lockdown for the whole country already since last week.
Yeah. Let's hope that President Duterte's threat to have violators of the lockdown shot be just another hyperbole for effect, that he didn't really mean it, but he has the habit of saying things like this, but ended up not doing anything, according to what he said.
He's known for making violent remarks anyway.
Yeah.
So hopefully it's just more like a threat rather than real action.
Yeah, but let's hope it's just another hyperbole from him.
Yeah, and what else? What are other countries that you'd like to tell us more?
One interesting point from Singapore. So when we talk about work from home, there's still a bit of flexibilities around the world, but for Singapore, all employers must allow their staff to work from home. So if any employer does not do that, they will get jailed or will get fined. And recently, they have already sent stop work orders to workplaces who have not done so. So it's around 129 stop work orders issued already to workplaces who have not allowed their employees to work from home.
Yeah, Singapore is known as a country which have tough measure even before coronavirus, and it's been regarded as one of the successful country in dealing with it. So they have imposed strict measure, and they cannot just be laid back with the past success of fighting with coronavirus because of the new foreign arrivals. We can see how imported case become new threat or new trend regarding more cases.
And it's not just for the lockdown or other measures that have been imposed. It's not really necessarily because of the number of new infections or the increasing deaths, but for many countries, they decided to toughen their measures. It's for their safety, because I'm pretty sure that every single government around the world, their first priority is to save lives. And this is a real pandemic. So I'm pretty sure that every single government wants to save lives.
Yes, and Khun Nat, you studied in Australia before.
Yes, I studied in Australia before. So Yeah, well, speaking of Australia, it's not just Australians. There are plenty of international students, also permanent residents and temporary residents who are not Australians to begin with. So some from China, some from Indonesia, and many countries around the world. Recently, they just announced a lockdown in New South Wales. So they have also mentioned that if anyone leaves their home without a good reason, they will be jailed or fined.
Yeah.
And New South Wales has a lot of new infections and deaths as well.
Yeah.
And if you remember, last month, Prime Minister Scott Morrison has also raised a travel ban to level 4, which is the highest already. So level 4 means do not travel, do not go overseas. And he also mentioned if you're going overseas during your school holidays, please don't. Stay at home. Even though the number of infections are not as high compared to other countries, but the government has decided to toughen their measures to save people's lives, no matter what state they live in.
Okay, thank you very much, Kun Nat, for telling us about what other countries are doing in terms of curfew, in terms of lockdown, in trying to fight coronavirus. And in Australia as well, right now we can see how social groups, volunteers are trying to help personnel, medical personnel in the country. It's that how they group together for their work in this crisis.